Hi, this is Amy
and Melissa. We are a couple of retired Texas teachers who are CALTs, Certified Academic Language Therapists. We started our own businesses, and now we have a podcast called The Dyslexia Duo.
So join us for our informative podcast, where we'll delve into dyslexia, covering the topics that affect parents, therapists, teachers, practitioners, and anyone who wants to learn more. We'll guide you through everything you need to know, from the first signs to the intricacies of dyslexia curriculum placement and beyond.
This season, we will cover the referral process, what to expect when your child or student is dyslexic, the generational impacts of dyslexia, and how to support those affected.
Come join us!
And Melissa.
And we're the
Dyslexia Duo.
So today we have a very special guest. And I know y'all hear me say we have a very special guest. I'm always amazed when I read about somebody or I see somebody and they're doing big things and they agree to come on here. So
well, you know what? This very special guest is from when we had another very special guest.
True. When we had
Nancy Hannigan.
Yeah, when we had Nancy Hannigan on their Dyslexia, she actually brought up your book. And so I took a note of it and I was like, I'm going to her and see if she'll come on the podcast. But, I mean, we haven't even introduced yourself. So go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners today.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Lindsay Kemeny, and I'm author of the book 7 Mighty Moves and my second book, 7 Mighty Moves Reading Resources. I have a third book coming out in a couple of months, and I'm a teacher. I'm currently teaching first grade, and I'm a mom to a son with dyslexia. So that's kind of me in a snapshot.
Wow. So your son with dyslexia, you said he was identified when he was in second grade?
Yeah, the end of second grade. And that was a complete shock to me. He is my third son. My first two learned to read rather easily. So I was really kind of surprised, alarmed when along comes my third child and he is struggling to learn how to read. I was doing all of the things I had been taught in college and my early years of teaching, and nothing was working. And I was really kind of embarrassed because I'm a teacher and I can't help my own son learn to read. And so, it wasn't until he was in second grade when we finally did some outside testing, and that's when we found out that he has dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. So reading disability, writing disability, math disability. And that just changed everything for me. I had to find out, what do students with dyslexia need to learn to read, right? And then that led to, what does everyone need to learn to read? What happens in your brain when you learn to read? And it was just kind of the snowball effect. Like, I just kept learning and reading things and watching things and listening to podcasts and watching these lectures, and it was just a huge pivot point in my career and in my life, really.
I think that you're kind of like both Amy and I, Lindsay, in that we're all educators and we're elementary education majors, but we didn't really know how to help people who truly needed to learn how to read.
Yeah, it's embarrassing, And as I was learning, I got really angry. I mean, the more I learned, the angrier I became, because I was thinking, why was I not taught these things? Why was I not taught this in college or my early years of teaching? And not only was I not taught a lot of the things I know now, but some of the things I had been taught had been debunked by research. And so, you just kind of go through, it's like the grief cycle almost, where you're really angry, then you're really sad. And it has made me just more and more determined to do everything I can to help others out there, to help other children out there, other teachers out there, to help those children.
Wow. And that's very inspirational of you to say, because I think Melissa and I kind of ran into the same thing before we started getting into this area. I can remember the first year I taught, and I'm an educator's daughter, right? So all I knew, I was that kid that went to school with her mom, and I had to get there early and I had to stay late. I played in the classroom, I ran around the school, because my mom was a teacher where I went to school. And you go to school and you go to college, and I went to college in the 80s and 90s, and it was a whole language movement. And then I get to my actual first teaching gig, and I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to teach this sixth grader how to read this word other than showing it to him over and over again. I didn't know that words made sounds. I didn't know that letters had sounds. I just thought, because I was taught to see it, say it. Even as a young person, and I was taught to see it, say it, because it was that whole language movement. And you feel like such a big fraud, definitely some imposter syndrome going on, because here you are in this big girl job and you don't know what you're doing. You don't feel like you know what you're doing.
Yeah. And I was heavily trained in balanced literacy with these, very much similar to whole language, right? Those beliefs really infiltrated balanced literacy. And I remember I always loved to teach reading and writing. Well, I wouldn't say writing. Now I love teaching writing, but especially reading. I always loved teaching reading. But when I think back, my early years of teaching, I feel like it was like really cloudy, like it was really hazy, like what to do. How do these students become readers? Oh, you just kind of immerse them, right? And we read to them and read with them, and then they read and they're going to turn into readers. And the thing is that it does work for some students. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't work for many, many more students. And I hate that it took me seeing that with my own children, because like I said, the first two, it didn't take much to get them to be readers. They could crack the code almost by themselves. But my third one was struggling. And so I hate that I had to go through that to really understand that. Why are we using this approach that works for like 30% of the class? Why don't we use an approach that can be beneficial for everyone in the class? We don't want to leave anyone behind.
Right. I'm with you on that too. Making me think though, because we know that dyslexia is, there's a dyslexia gene. It runs in family. Can you think back on anybody in your family or on your husband's side of the family that might be dyslexic?
Yes, but they don't like me to talk about it publicly.
I get it. I understand.
But definitely, I think like everyone's like at these different stages, right? And so, but my son loves for me to share his story, and within him has just grown this real like spirit of wanting to help others. In fact, I had logged in one time when he started 7th grade. He went to junior high here, and they start doing everything online, and it was a really stressful time for me because I wasn't sure, like moving to junior high, how he would do. And I just remember logging in and looking at some of the assignments he had submitted that day, and one of them he was answering a question, and as part of his answer, he said, because there are other kids that have learning disabilities like me, and I want to help them. And nice. It was just like such a special moment, because I'm like, oh. And so he loves when I share his story. I still don't use his name publicly in case he changes his mind. Like, I'm just waiting for him to get a little bit older and to be sure that he's really comfortable with that. He was diagnosed with depression at the same time as dyslexia, and his depression all centered around his struggles learning to read. And so I just saw firsthand how tightly connected self-esteem and the ability to read are. And that is why I'm so passionate about this, because it was horrible. He said and did things that like no mother should have to hear, no child should have to feel. And when things got so bad, I just remember like I couldn't believe I just remember the thought of being like, I can't believe I have a 9-year-old son who is suicidal. I couldn't believe it. And I wouldn't have believed it if I didn't experience it. And when things got so bad, we did all these things to help his depression. And of course, we went to a therapy and got professional help when things got, I thought, beyond what I could do. But I found that out of everything we did, what helped him the most was the ability to read, because as his reading improved, his self-esteem improved. And it was gradual. It wasn't instant. It was gradual, but it was really beautiful to witness because I just felt like he was slowly healing as his reading got better.
Wow.
Isn't that incredible that he's ultimately going to make a difference in other people's lives too by sharing his story, even if it's indirectly through you. He's sharing his story, and you're able to get the word out there to other people, other parents who might be going through the same thing, and they can share this with their own child and make a difference in their lives and value how much the intervention really changes a person's entire life trajectory.
Absolutely.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So you're making me think of, there's a graphic that's out there called the dyslexia iceberg, because dyslexia seldom exists in isolation, right?
Right.
And so like an iceberg, you see the tip of the ice, but there's so much more to the iceberg below the water. And a lot of the things they list is dysgraphia, dyscalculia, depression, anxiety, acting out behaviors, ADHD. All those are other things that are below the surface when you think about dyslexia, because dyslexia seldom walks alone. It usually has a friend or two or three that comes along for the ride.
Right. Absolutely. He has ADHD as well. And the other thing is, like, dyslexia doesn't look exactly the same in every student, right? You guys know that. And it's the spectrum. So my son is very severe dyslexia. Dyslexia exists on that continuum. And you can have mild, you can have severe. And I just remember after he was diagnosed, the neuropsychologist said, he's in the 1%. And I'm like, what does that mean? What do you mean he's in the 1%? And he said, only 1% of the students I see are this severe. And there was like still so much reason to be hopeful. And I didn't know then, does that mean he will be able to learn to read? Like, what does this mean? But he did learn how to read. He was an excellent reader. I remember when he was in 6th grade, I progress monitored him, and he was 140 words correct per minute, 100% accuracy, great retell. And like, I cried. I just didn't ever know if we were going to get there, especially knowing he was so extreme. And it's just like, that's what I want for all kids. And I've just really learned through him that we can have high expectations for these students. And you're so right, Amy. It's like that iceberg where there's all these other things happening under the surface. And so you're just looking at so many different areas, right, that where you can help them.
Right. No, I love the way that you talked about his progress just now, because there's other parents out there who may be starting this journey. When you're in it, you are in it. You think there's no way out, and you're just kind of in it. And to know that, there is that light at the end of that tunnel. There is hope for them to learn to write and to read.
Yeah.
So, as a seasoned educator, what were some of the things that you noticed in your own son so that maybe some other parents could be looking for some of those things?
Well, I didn't know any of those signs. And it's like, until he was diagnosed. And that was part of my anger too, when I learned that dyslexia is the most commonly diagnosed learning disability, but I wasn't taught anything about it in my teacher preparation program. Even now, it's very rare in the school setting, at least in mine, to have any kind of trainings on dyslexia. And I think it's so sad because it's really so prevalent. So looking back, I can see those signs. He was slow to develop his speech. He really struggled learning his alphabet, letter names and sounds. That is a sign. We know that mispronouncing words can be a sign. We know that, of course, that slow, when it's hard for them to learn to read, that's a sign. I wish I had known. Like, I look back now on things he did in kindergarten, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, it was so obvious, but I didn't know the signs. I didn't know what to look for. And I wish I had. And it's not that I could have prevented his dyslexia, because he has dyslexia. He's going to have dyslexia his whole life. But I could have prevented a lot of the reading problems he had just by setting him up for success, in pre-K and in kindergarten, it doesn't mean like I said, it doesn't mean he wouldn't have it, but there are definitely things that we can do to help set them up with this strong foundation if I had known them. So it's just one of those like, oh, I wish I'd known, but I just turned that to let me help others and let me help my students and let me help my little first graders do everything I can to kind of prevent reading failure in the future. I'm just going to give them a really strong foundation now.
Yes. I think about my students when they mispronounce words. An example I think of, one just happened recently. A 9-year-old, almost 10-year-old said his teacher's moving to Iowa. And I said, Iowa? Do you mean Iowa? No, it's Iowa. I was like, oh, I've never heard of that place.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I hope she likes it in Iowa. It just was so cute. And, I think that I know for myself, when my son was going through that introductory phase of being a preschooler, and when it's, expected that they mispronounce words, you think it's really cute. And, I love it. I love the little things my son would say like that.
Yeah.
But as they get older, that should start dropping off. So when you hear a 7, 8, 9-year-old mispronouncing words like that, that's kind of the red flag too, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
Hi, this is Melissa with Kids First Dyslexia Services. I am excited to share with you my private practice. Kids First Dyslexia Services is a private practice that specializes in dyslexia therapy. Each one-on-one session focuses on instruction specific to your child's needs in a nurturing environment that develops self-esteem, builds confidence, and fosters a sense of accomplishment, resulting in happier kids with higher levels of achievement. We provide a professional, personalized experience, always putting the child first. We value the relationships with both our students and parents, because strengthening skills and overcoming hurdles to achieve desired goals and success is a team effort. For more information, please visit www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com. That is www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com.
Hi, this is Amy Rodenroth, and as part of the Dyslexia Duo podcast team and owner of Discovery Dyslexia Services, I want to talk to you about my business. Our COUT-trained team offers expert virtual or in-person therapy located in Prosper, Texas, using proven dyslexia curricula like Take Flight, Build, MTA, Alphabetic Phonics, and Reading by Design. We also provide crucial independent evaluations and advocacy services. Don't wait. Empower your child today. Visit www.discovered.com to learn more. That again is www.discovered.com. Discovered, covering all your dyslexia needs. Let's return to the show. So you've done a lot of research probably on your own. Did you go through letters training? Is that what
I did. By that time, it was a review for me, but still, I'm like always building on my knowledge. So I absolutely loved letters training. Yeah.
It's awesome. So now with all your research with your books, and we were talking before we hit record on this podcast, Lindsay, y'all, is still teaching first grade, and she's getting ready to push out your third book, right?
Yeah.
And I said, how? How are you? And what did you tell me this was?
It's become my hobby. And I also said, I have no life, right? I'm like, my career is teaching kids to learn to read and write. And my hobby is learning and sharing about how kids learn to read and write. So, yeah.
That's awesome. I need to find a hobby. Let me put it there. A hobby. But in all of your training, your research, and everything you've done, there's lots of discussion about what the science of reading is. And I think we even had a guest on here that when she talked about the science of reading, I think it was Dr. Wasowitz.
Yes.
Who kept calling it capital S, capital R for science of reading.
Science of reading is just a body of research that we have about how best to teach kids to read. So that's really kind of the most simplistic answer. We're talking about research. We're talking about science behind the practices that we use.
So why do you think, kind of going into our next question, why do you think there's still such a divide? I mean, I have a friend her dad's dyslexic, and so he calls LinkedIn. And I'm like, no, it's not LinkedIn. But on LinkedIn, and I can see a big divide between the Science of Reading camp and still the guided language, all of those camps like that. Why do you think it's so hard to come together, I feel like, and kind of meet halfway sometimes? But why do you think there's such a great divide? You know, we talk about whole language, guided reading is starting at comprehension and then going down into alphabet phonological awareness. And then the area that Melissa and I work in, we are a bottom-up approach. We start with alphabet and phonological awareness, decoding, fluency, morphology to lead into comprehension. But why do you think there's still such a divide between the two?
So, interesting question. I have a lot of different thoughts about this. First, I can see where those beliefs came from, like the whole language balance literacy, where you're kind of thinking, well, like, listen to me read. I'm a proficient reader. I'm not like sounding out every word. I'm reading for meaning. And it's almost like they want to skip to that part. And, you know, it's like you think of those predictable repetitive texts that unfortunately became so popular in like kindergarten, those lower grades, because they sound like they're reading already. The kids just memorize the pattern and look from the picture, and they just, and it's all about think about the meaning and sound like a fluent reader, which is the goal. But you're skipping such an important step there. And so sometimes I think people think about their own experience reading, and maybe a child or a grandchild, they're like, oh yeah, we just read to them and we surrounded them with good literature, and then they learned to read. And it really takes a deeper look to see what is happening. I have a son who's just a beautiful piano player. He's very, very gifted. And you can hear him playing a song and it's just fluent and beautiful. But that's not how it started. If you hear him practice, he's got to be slow and accurate. He's looking at the notes, watching his fingers. We can't skip that important step and get to the fluent piano playing, just like with reading. And so, you know, as a kindergarten teacher, yeah, it's a lot harder to listen to a child read a decodable book and sound out the same word over and over on every page. It takes a lot of patience. It would be much easier to listen to them just read a predictable repetitive text where they already sound like they're fluent. But I can't skip that important step, because for those sound symbol correspondences to get into memory, they've got to practice them. They've got to decode and sound out. We've got to go through that necessary process, you know, and then they're going to do better in second, third grade because they have that strong foundation. So sometimes I think people are maybe trying to skip, and we're wanting to focus on meaning right away. Well, yes, we're going to focus on meaning and language comprehension as we're reading to those brand new students, right? And having discussion and working on oral language and reading complex texts to them. But at the same time, we are reinforcing that decoding and the sound symbol correspondences and the phonemic awareness and all the things. The other thing I think of is we have this divide, and it is really hard to take a hard look at your teaching and realize that some of the things you're doing are not the most beneficial for all students in your class. That is hard to kind of admit that to yourself. So I think that's another reason why we still maybe have this divide, because it takes a really strong person to say, oh my gosh, I was doing something wrong. And like I went through that, I felt guilt, I felt anger, you know, and that is hard. And also we have sometimes the proponents of certain methods have like some skin in the game. So that is hard for them to admit that something they've been selling for years or training they've been doing, or, you know, it's hard for them to admit that maybe it's not the best. So I don't know. Those are some of my thoughts. We have to be so careful that adult egos don't get in the way, because that can be the biggest barrier sometimes.
And I think that introspection piece, like you were talking about, I can remember doing some of that myself, saying, okay, what I'm doing is not working. What do I do now? And I think some people that are in like maybe remote areas, even though we now have internet, and I didn't have internet when I first started. I know that makes me sound super old, but when I first started in education, we didn't have the internet in our classroom. I know it was around, we just didn't have it in the classroom.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do or how to look up things other than library and looking. And what did I find? I would find the readers with Tip and Sally and all those. Look, Tip, look, there's Sally, those type of books where it's just over and over again. And I love your piano analogy that you pulled into it, because you're right. I can remember when I don't play piano now, but when I was a younger person, you can't get fluent until you walk the weeds for a bit, learning those notes and getting that muscle memory built up when you do that. I love that analogy.
I also think that there's something to be said too for proper professional development. And I think a lot of the teachers, we all know that we go through a lot of professional development. And I think that there could be buy-in from all of us. I mean, I know I was there at professional developments when I was saying, no, this doesn't apply to me. I don't need to do this. But if we can take a step back and think of it from the perspective of a struggling reader or the perspective of a struggling math student or something of that effect, that's where that buy-in, like you were talking about, could play a big part in this. And I think it also leads itself to, when we do all of our assessments and our screeners and things of that nature, sometimes we collect data, but we don't know why we're collecting the data, or we don't know what really we're looking for. Yeah, what we're doing with that data, what we're looking for, and the impact that data knowledge could bring to changing the way you teach a student or the way you work with a small group, any of those things. So thinking about that with your expertise in the classroom, because I didn't have a whole lot of time in the actual individual general education classroom. How do you think that could improve just your knowledge of screeners, assessments, and observations? How could that improve instruction in the general education classroom?
Yeah. Okay. Well, one thing I want to go back 1 second and just say about this. When you are a kindergarten or first grade teacher and you're just using predictable, repetitive text and they're kind of memorizing the pattern, looking at the pictures, the thing is, it looks like they're reading. So this is also why I think we have this issue where we have some people resistant to maybe changing, because you have to look a lot deeper, a lot harder to see. Like, the kindergarten teacher that's using those texts might not realize there's a problem. The first grade teacher might not realize there's a problem. It's going to be when those students hit second, third, fourth grade, suddenly they don't have those books with the patterns anymore and with the pictures, and it's harder to guess from the context. And it's those teachers who realize, oh my gosh, this child can't read. So there's also there can be a little confirmation bias here, because you don't see it and you're like, what are they talking about? I'm using, these approaches. I'm using balanced literacy and everyone's learning how to read. Well, look at how those students are doing a couple years from now, right? And that is where assessment comes in, and the type of assessment we have that we're using. I think assessment is huge. I think if you're not doing anything with the assessment data, there's no point in giving the assessment in the first place. So we need to be intentional and use the data from our assessments. And there's a variety of assessments we can give. I love having a good screener, because the screener is going to tell you, hey, who's at risk, right? Mm-hmm. And you will see this sometimes when you see a student who they read the passage okay, it's not terrible, but you test them on nonsense words and they completely bomb that. That is a huge red flag. And that is telling you, oh, this child might be memorizing words as a whole. They might be guessing from context. And sometimes people, nonsense word tests get a bad rap, but they're actually very valuable, because you're seeing, hey, do they know their letter sounds and can they blend them? That's really important to know, because as they get to harder words, they're going to use that knowledge. Like when they're figuring out a multisyllabic word, I mean, each little part of that syllable is kind of like a nonsense word, and we want to make sure that they have those decoding skills. So I just think assessment is huge. And the screener is going to tell you who's at risk if you can get a good screener. And then you've got to look deeper, right? So what exactly is going on with that child? You're going to do a diagnostic. If they struggle with that screener, let's dive deeper and do a diagnostic assessment that's going to tell us what exactly do they need help with. I like the analogy of swimming. So the screener is going to tell you, hey, who's at risk for drowning? Like who isn't a good who's going to drown? But it doesn't tell you what do they need help with. Is it stamina? Is it their strokes? What exactly? And a diagnostic is what's going to help you determine that. Like, okay, it's the butterfly stroke that they need. It's holding their breath underwater. The diagnostic is going to help with that.
Oh, I love that analogy. And that really opens up a lot of my eyes for sure. And I also appreciate your classroom approach to that too. That knowledge that I don't have that really helps me see it from that perspective.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then there's progress monitoring assessments too. So, and that is invaluable for me because that tells me, is my instruction working? So if I am progress monitoring a student, every week or every 2 weeks, I want to see those data points going up. And if they're not, I have to figure out something different. It might not be a completely different intervention. Maybe the intervention's okay, but maybe I need to increase the dosage. Maybe I need to get that child in a smaller group. Or maybe I'm like, hey, what I'm doing is working. Awesome. We're keep going on the track. So I just think it's a missed opportunity if we're not using the data from our assessments. Those are huge and they should inform our instruction.
And I agree with you totally. I'm not going to say, but I agree with you completely with that. What I've seen though, because we preach it. That's the same thing we preach. You've got even in dyslexia therapy, the assessment should guide your instruction. It's really going to help. But many educators, they get all this good data and they go, what do I do with it? Mm-hmm. How do I support my student? I have all this great stuff in front of me now. And being in college, they didn't get that information, or maybe their district has bought into something that doesn't really support what they're seeing with that data, right? I would love to see change, which kind of moves me into your book a little bit. This completes part 1 of our interview with Lindsay Kemeny. Join us next week as we conclude our discussion. The Dyslexia Duo podcast hosts are Amy Rodenroth,
Melissa Dean.
Our producer is Greg Rodenroth.
You can find us on Facebook at The Dyslexia Duo.
Email us any questions or comments at thedyslexiaduo@gmail.com.
Awareness is so important. Share this podcast with your friends,
family,
and teachers.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.